In focus tonight is Ukraine, Russia, China lineup against the United States. That's a talking point of the in focus tonight. Russia, China lineup against the United States. And to talk more about that, I'm joined by Putin-Xi Joint, former Indian ambassador to Russia. He's also a former deputy NSA or deputy national security advisor. Professor Swaran Singh of JNU also joins me on the show. Thank you, Professor Singh and Ambassador Saran for joining me on this show. Professor Swaran Singh, how do you see the statement, the joint statement, and what could be the possible impact on, say, the situation in Ukraine, also specifically for India, because, you know, this only demonstrates that if this goes to the next level, given, you know, the relations that we have with Russia, the Ukraine is not a distant land anymore. It could have implications right at your door.
Definitely, I think you're right in saying that Ukraine crisis continuing would definitely make sure that Russia and China come further closer. And that's not a very good news for India's relations with China, because there are tensions that are going on between India and China. It would also mean, you know, international markets being volatile, etc., etc. So it's definitely something that India has to worry about. India may be pushed to take sides between the United States and Russia, etc. So this definitely is indicating Russia and China coming relatively closer to demonstrate a kind of a joint front, as if at least on issues of Ukraine dealing with United States, because United States has issues with both China and Russia. So that in that sense joins them together. But let's also remember that China and Russia do have their difficulties in their mutual relationship. You know, before they became so close friends, because both are being pushed by United States and its European allies, there were a huge issue about 300,000 plus ethnic Chinese in Far East. And it was being said as demographic invasion of China into Russia. Remember, Beijing till date has not recognized formally the annexation of Crimea by Russia. So there are issues between these two countries that will continue to be irritating their relationship. And I think that has to be kept in mind. And I think specifically to your question about India, from the joint statement, I think Russia has definitely contributed to certain positive signals coming out of joint statement as far as India is concerned. The first is joint statement apparently deflects the focus from Quad, which has seen both Foreign Minister Lavrov and of course Foreign Minister Wang Yi making very harsh statements vis-a-vis Quad. The joint statement is deflecting attention now to AUKUS, and they talk about submarine deployments. And that is partly because now there is a talk about AUKUS Plus to bring Japan and South Korea into it. And that seems to be greater headache for China. And in that sense, Russia has contributed to making sure that, you know, deflection happens from AUKUS, where India stands. And finally, I think very clear mention of joint statement saying we should strengthen and revive Russia, India, China triangular conversation. Indian foreign minister had hosted both foreign ministers in India last year. So I think joint statement, if you look at very specifically what it says about India, it definitely has something which is positive compared to how the opening ceremony had showcased a soldier, and that had kind of been seen in India as a very bad signal. So definitely Chinese are not willing to give any positive signals. So if there are positive signals in joint statement, I think the credit in that case should go to the Russian administration and President Putin himself.
Okay. Professor Swaran Singh, I want to ask you about one part of the statement where, you know, both the countries, the joint statement says the use of democracy for pressure on countries, putting pressure on countries is something which they don't agree upon with the rest of the world. Are they taking on the West, or is it a reference to India also? How should we read it?
You heard recently when President Joe Biden had called the Summit of Democracies, inviting over 100 countries to attend it. Xi Jinping responded by saying that China is the largest democracy on the planet. So Chinese have insisted, in fact, 1996 onwards, they had been talking about democratizing international relations. And from 2013 onwards, President Xi Jinping has been talking about democratization of China. He talks about by 2049 making China a beautiful, prosperous, and democratic country. So Chinese discourses have over time included expression of democracy by highlighting that there are different genres of democracy that exist in the different countries, and there cannot be any standard liberal democratic template that has to be followed everywhere. So increasingly, we have seen this propensity or tendency of Chinese to showcase that they are willing to sort of also showcase that they have their own kind of democracy. They are seeking their own kind of democratization of international relations. And that is where they put this formulation of building a community of destiny of humankind.
But Professor Singh, if I can read out from the statement, here they dismiss democracy out of hand. The statement reads, and I quote, "The sides believe that advocacy of democracy and human rights must not be used to put pressure on other countries." So they're saying basically that don't raise the issue of democracy and human rights as a pressure tactic on us, and they see, they're making no pretense of even standing with human rights or democracy.
Sure. Chinese and of course Russians, but Chinese particularly, have been critical of democracy, which is a liberal democracy template. So when they say that democracy should not be used, then that is an insinuation of West, and India sometimes is included in some of those initiatives, where democracy is hoisted in terms of a specific template to be followed by other countries. And same about human rights. Chinese have never ever raised issues of human rights with any country, any regime, that they seek to build relationship, to have relationship of trade or investments. And that has been a standard line where the foreign aid and investments of China have become a different kind of a template, saying we have nothing to do with internal affairs. We are only looking at the stability and then kind of investments leading to certain benefits on the ground. So in that sense, when they say democracy of a particular kind should not be used to sort of build certain campaign at international level, they are specifically meaning only a certain kind of democracy, which is the liberal democracy. Otherwise, Chinese have been over time become far more comfortable in hoisting that they are also trying to build their own kind of democracy. So I think in that sense, they are saying a certain specific kind of use of democracy as a campaign should not be.
Okay. How should we read the presence of Prime Minister Imran Khan there? I understand Prime Minister Khan was invited for the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics, but beyond that, some meetings were held, though even they were held on Zoom. How do we see his presence in China?
Let me be quick, Amrit, to say that Imran Khan's visit to China and engagement with Xi Jinping is now driven primarily because of economic compulsions. China is one of the countries which is trying to rescue economy in Pakistan. And China, again, the nexus is now changing its direction. China is engaging Pakistan far more to protect its own investments inside the CPEC. So China's interest in sustaining either economy or stability in Pakistan is driven by very selfish interests of their own assets and engineers and Chinese and others. That's how they have asked to Pakistan to raise 15,000 troops to protect those assets and engineers.
Should that worry us?
It's a very different kind of a nexus now. It's focused on bilaterals, economy for Imran Khan and their own investments for China. Very little to do now with India.
Professor, should we be overtly worried about that?
Definitely, because both are nuclear weapon states, and Pakistan is always, there are suspicions about sympathizers in the establishment in the deep state, which could create certain kind of nexus with Taliban, and that could be, further creating chaos. But what I'm saying is that at some stage, China-Pakistan nexus was very India-centric. Now they have difficulties between themselves to resolve. And the focus there is shifting on different direction and is becoming less focused on India. In that sense.
We leave it there. Ambassador Pankaj Charan, Professor Swaran Singh, many thanks for joining me on the show and sharing your insights with us this evening. Thank you.